Welcome to the second week of my weekly reflections. Introducing this week, we went over the idea of our first workshop, the Expose and Replace workshop, introduced by Dave. I got round to choosing my final frames and the film I wanted to end up using, and we looked at our first case study, which was Edward Hopper. Starting off the week, Dave introduced the Expose and Replace workshop, which basically explored the idea of analog manipulation of the digital frame. In particular, myself, I ended up choosing the A frame from Drive, just because it looked compositionally very strong, looking at the rule of thirds and how characters such as Ryan Gosling's character within the film covered over 2/3 of the frame, alluding to the idea of power or a sense of ownership within the action of the actual frame itself. Another thing which I liked and why I chose this frame was because of the strong use of lighting and the harsh contrast and the warm colour scheme that was introduced all throughout the aspect of this one shot. Something that was key to looking for within our digital shots, which could easily be manipulated or edited. Basically, the impact of Expose and Replace was to manipulate or change the tone or emotional value of the scene itself. I feel like I did this effectively by looking at the use of xerography, which was the manipulation of the colour, size and scale using the printer and scanner. I explored how I could use layering, and I even used block colour and shape to denote the idea of differing mindsets and other explorations such as that. The main components of the Expose and Replace workshop was to replace sections of the frame using different colours and differing experimentations. I primarily looked at the use of changing colour to indicate mood or tone. This would be one of my final experiments I ended up creating, which looks at the hues of blues, which is a more inviting and colder colour which irradiates the raw emotion. It's highlighted by the idea and use of shape, such as a female character having a square behind her head, meaning an idea of like boxed in and her ideology is inside the box, whereas Ryan Gosling's character has a circle which is meant to denote the idea of open-mindedness and going forth and like persuading the action within the frame, obviously being the most dominant character. This theme trended and continued throughout my work, looking at the idea of line and how line can be dominant, and as well how like colour can be used to introduce and explore a range of new emotions such as love and hatred. This continued forward when I was looking at the use of exposing sections of the frame, which was strongly identified throughout the use of the key lighting here, as that was the key lit lighting of the actual frame itself. I wanted to highlight how it brought warmth to the frame. To the frame. I did this by cutting out and obviously underlaying a section of the shot itself and introducing a warmer colour to try and bring a focal point to the action of the characters. Moving on throughout the week, we began to identify the films we wanted to use, and I ended up looking at 2001: A Space Odyssey. I decided this as my final film, as not only had I seen the film before, but Stanley Kubrick's work and impact upon the film drove home a lot of these ideas of how shape and reoccurring colour can impact the emotional value of a scene. Not only did the genre of sci-fi intrigue me, but the character development and interaction with the audience through point of view shots helped emphasise the relationship between my audience and how I could manipulate the original frames. I ended up choosing a range of shots which highly exposed either character or facial expression and emotion, trying to portray how key elements and shots throughout the film, would highlight the emotional value and tension which was created. Going forward from this, we looked at the idea of colour schemes, and what I initially did was to break down each colour, the colour scheme which was provided within the frame, and then chose a range and selection of the actual colours from the overall film itself. Overall, definitely the film provided a more organic colour spread than I was expecting. Having watched the film, I expected a range of neon colours and a vibrant colour scheme which was predominant throughout the use of lighting, but having handpicked and using the eyedropper tool in Photoshop, it led me to understand how such an organic base of colours could help emphasise the humanity to the actual film, especially between characters such as Hal and Dave, and looking at the reaction between the two and how they interplay with one another. Finally, throughout the week, we basically explored our first case study, which was Edward Hopper. Edward Hopper uses, or is predominantly known for, his acrylic-based paintings and their realism and their link to cinematography, just because they portray such a great amount of narrative within his work and include a huge sense of space and framing, identifying how people and places can be used to engage or enforce a narrative. This is especially seen within his work such as New York Movie and Office at Night, which only depict one or two characters, but you can denote a whole scene and scenario throughout their posture and body language and emotions which are expressed on their face. Edward Hopper also likes to experiment with composition, which tends to lead him to using differing ratios and compositions which aren't predominantly used in film, and it's something I want to use as influence within my own work, just as he usually depicts narratives throughout various different ways and options, such as in New York Movie he splits the frame down in two, as the left portion of the frame and the right side can be described as two separate narratives, but brought together can identify a stronger purpose towards the character within the frame, as well as her emotional intentions. We explored the idea of Edward Hopper by creating timed responses. These responses were predominantly made in line, as it's a analog process which I hope to develop on and something I want to work on further. Specifically using ink and biro, I wanted to test my strength of line and challenge myself in how I could produce a range of tests and replications of his work. Overall, I think they worked really well, and I'm proud of the pieces I produced, even though they're small in scale. I believe they captured the essence and the motion of the narrative and the characters. Edward Hopper is known for his relation to cinema, and his impact and use of cinematography is highly predominant within his work, and it's something I hope to influence and use, and understanding how he can use an analog process such as paint to replicate this sense of depth and narrative, and to be able to tell a story through the emotion of characters. Overall, I'm happy with the work I was able to produce this week, and I hope that the Expose and Replace workshop influences my developing frames. I would like to identify how the use of layering can build up the emotional values of a scene, and I've already got ideas stemming from how the characters could interplay and the frames could react to one another. If I was to reflect on Hopper's work, I would want to be able to portray an individual narrative throughout my scenes. I hope to identify throughout my work as I go on through this project how ideas such as interaction with the audience could be explored, even if that's through animation or other means. Hoping to identify how the audience could even depict various narratives or multiple narratives even. Creating a conversation between my work is the key element I want to take away from this, basically. And I hope that obviously introducing the colour schemes I've produced would help enforce this through the organic connection between Stanley Kubrick's inspirational work and Edward Hopper's. I'm looking forward to the work I'm able to produce next week, and hope to explore how my work can develop further.